I want you to picture a specific moment from when I was living in a shared apartment in Tokyo. I was staying with two roommates, one Muslim and one Chinese, and, well, we made a minor slip-up with the complex garbage sorting rules.
Which is famously easy to do.
Incredibly easy. Now, in many parts of the world, you'd expect a neighbor to, knock on your door, maybe yell a bit, or at least tell you what you did wrong. I was kind of bracing myself for that.
Some kind of direct confrontation.
Exactly. But that's not what happened. Instead, we opened the door to find the trash bag simply returned, just sitting right there on our mat. No note, no knocking, just this absolute heavy silence.
Wow.
And that specific moment of quiet rejection, it hit so much harder than any shouting match could have. It made me realize that the bag wasn't just trash, it was a message. We hadn't just broken a rule, we'd been marked as outsiders and just silently removed from the community's circle of trust.
Yeah.
This is the side of Japan that you rarely see as a tourist. It's a form of discrimination that isn't loud or violent, but it is, in its own way, terrifyingly polite.
That experience you had, it just perfectly captures the central paradox we're going to explore today. We're looking far beyond that visible social order, the politeness, the amazing infrastructure, the safety, to really examine the profound hidden costs of demanding cohesion by conformity.
Right.
Japan is, of course, known for wa, or harmony, but that harmony, it so often comes at the expense of the individual self.
And that's really our mission in this deep dive. We're trying to understand this silent exclusion, which is, when you look at it, both cultural policy and economic policy all rolled into one. We've structured our conversation into three major interconnected areas.
Okay.
First, we'll analyze the deep psychological toll that this culture of constant self-monitoring imposes on everyone living there, whether you're a Japanese citizen or a foreign resident.
Then we'll move up a level to policy. We'll analyze the philosophical and, frankly, political shortcomings of tobunka kisei, that's Japan's attempt at multicultural living, and evaluate how it fundamentally fails when you measure it against established global standards for integration and human rights.
And finally, we're going to connect that cultural rigidity and policy failure to some profound national economic consequences. We'll show how this resistance to difference actively impedes the kind of disruptive innovation and economic regeneration that Japan desperately needs to be competitive in the 21st century.
So if we step back, the core paradox is this. Why is a society that values was so intensely, why is it struggling with an identity crisis that is simultaneously crushing the mental health of its citizens and undermining its ability to thrive economically?
Let's start by opening up that psychological pressure cooker.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's unpack that psychological weight because it is immense. The pressure cooker really begins with that all-encompassing demand for wa, for group harmony. It's not just a suggestion, it's an invisible but incredibly powerful rule that basically dictates you must actively suppress your personal desires, your emotions, your needs, all in favor of the collective.
And this is where we really need to apply a kind of psychoanalytic lens to understand the internal architecture of the Japanese psyche that's been shaped by this culture. I mean, every individual is constantly managing their internal world, right? And the Western concepts of the your basic drives and the ego as the mediator, they get really complicated by a profoundly influential superego. In the Japanese context, that internalized superego is heavily conditioned by expectations of high performance, a strong work ethic, and, most importantly, the imperative of group harmony and respect for hierarchical authority.
So it's not just your conscience, it's the group's conscience inside your head.
That's a perfect way to put it. It creates truly intense internalized pressure to conform perfectly.
And this constant management of the self, trying to be the perfect group member, leads directly to that classic duality that defines so much of the societal experience, honne and tatemae.
That's right. Honne refers to a person's true feelings, their genuine desires, their fundamental personality, the things they keep deeply hidden, reserved only for their most trusted, intimate circle.
And by contrast, tatemae is the public facade. It's the behavior, the expected opinions, the actions that are required by society or by your position or the group you're in.
And the commitment to tatemae is so strong that it requires people to go to extraordinary lengths to avoid any kind of direct confrontation or disagreement. Any direct rejection or, emotional outburst is typically seen as insulting, aggressive, or just a complete failure of the social contract.
The tatemae has to be maintained at all costs. It's the social lubricant.
It is. And this isn't just some ancient custom. It became acutely pronounced in the high-growth post-war era. The national emphasis was on collective recovery and corporate success. The whole function of tatemae is minimizing discord. We see this play out in communications that involve what we call white lies or extreme indirection.
I've definitely seen that.
A speaker will sacrifice emotional truth in the moment if it means avoiding the disapproval of others or, God forbid, a public failure, which is a major source of personal and collective shame.
But maintaining this dual existence, living authentically in only a small corner of your life, that has to come at an immense psychological cost. It turns daily life into an exhausting performance.
It does. It leads to chronic anxiety, depression, and a profound, diminished sense of self-identity because your public self is always a mask.
We found a really powerful personal account from a young professional named Kenji, who was working in a typical high-pressure Tokyo office. This story just brings the whole theoretical concept of conformity pressure to life.
Yeah, this one is striking.
So Kenji finished his specific tasks for the day with 2 hours to spare. By any modern efficiency-focused standard, he should have been free to leave. But the moment he prepared to pack up, he sensed a total shift in the environment. He described the office climate, the collective mood, the unspoken rule as the kuki, or air, shifting aggressively against him.
And it's so important to note that the kuki pressure is entirely silent. No one yelled at him, no one stared, no one explicitly said, hey, you need to stay.
Not a word.
The collective, suffocating silence of his colleagues, who were still sitting there and conforming to the standard workday expectation, that forced him to sit back down. He ended up staring at a blank screen for 2 more hours, simply to restore that demanded silent harmony.
Wow.
This suppression of the authentic self, the desire to just go home, it became a daily, exhausting ritual of self-censorship for him.
What's terrifying about that situation is that the pressure isn't exerted through explicit rules or a direct supervisor. The control mechanism is purely social, not institutional.
Precisely. The core fear isn't of being fired, but of a kind of modern-day ostracism known traditionally as mura hakubu. This is the terror of being treated as a ghost, to be politely and silently removed from the social network.
Like my trash bag.
Exactly like your trash bag. In this context, the extreme politeness acts less as a virtue and more as an exceptionally effective mechanism of social control. This dynamic fosters emotional hollowness and profound identity crises because the self is constantly on guard. Shame, specifically, is tied directly to the collective sense of identity. Failing to meet the collective expectation is a failure of the self, which is overwhelming.
And when emotions, especially negative ones like anger, frustration, or sadness, are perpetually bottled up for the sake of group harmony, they have to surface somewhere. We see this clinically in the manifestation of psychological distress as somatization.
Somatization is a phenomenon that's common in cultures where emotional expression is restricted. The psychological distress, because it can't be processed or articulated emotionally due to stigma, it manifests physically.
So headaches, chronic pain.
Headaches, chronic pain, gastrointestinal issues. It's the body absorbing the unexpressed conflict. And when that psychological burden becomes too heavy, we see these specific societal phenomena emerge.
Such as the phenomena of hikikomori seclusion and futuku, or school refusal.
Exactly. Hikikomori refers to acute social withdrawal, often lasting for months or even years, where individuals retreat entirely from social life, often confined to their homes. Now, it's often misunderstood as simple laziness, but clinically, it's linked to an overwhelming inability to cope with the complex demands of the honne tatemae divide and the immense pressure to perform socially.
It's school refusal.
Similarly, futuku, where children are absent from school for over 30 days for personal or social reasons, not health or financial ones, it's a form of withdrawal where the pressure of the hierarchical school environment becomes unbearable. Both are deeply rooted in the systemic failure to accommodate authentic individual needs.
And we absolutely cannot discuss this culture of rigorous self-monitoring without addressing karoshi, the term for death by overwork, which has been part of the lexicon since the 1970s.
Karoshi is the ultimate tragic expression of conformity pressure in the workplace. The culture presupposes total dedication to work. Workloads are routinely excessive. The social contract dictates that if everyone else is conforming to this rigorous schedule, then asking for help or admitting failure or requesting time off is associated with profound shame.
Which makes it nearly impossible to seek support before you hit a crisis point.
It does, which sadly sometimes leads to occupational sudden death, linked to aggravated cardiovascular conditions from heavy workloads, or even suicide.
So if this conformity creates such chronic stress, How are people managing it without triggering the powerful social stigma that's associated with seeking mental health support?
The focus is shifting, but it's being done very subtly, often through the lens of holistic health. Framing mental well-being as an extension of physical health allows people to engage in self-care without having to publicly admit to a psychological crisis. The stigma remains, so the solution has to be socially acceptable.
The rise of 24-hour convenience gyms seems like a perfect example of this kind of culturally responsive coping mechanism. They exploded in popularity because they slot flexibly into the intense, often erratic schedules of Japanese workers.
They offer a flexible, personalized, and crucially private space. People can manage stress through physical activity, which is universally accepted and non-shameful. We know that exercise releases pleasure-inducing neurochemicals like endocannabinoids and endogenous opioids. It provides an essential yet culturally acceptable release valve for the tremendous internal pressure of maintaining tatemae all day.
And beyond the physical, there are specific cognitive strategies emerging, primarily centered around emotional management, like something called cognitive reappraisal.
This strategy is about teaching individuals to reinterpret the meaning of a stressful situation before their feelings about it are fully developed, and thereby altering the emotional response. So instead of internalizing an angry boss's actions as a personal failing, the individual learns to reappraise the situation.
Like, maybe the boss is under stress, or the problem is organizational, not personal.
Exactly. This is promoted in mindfulness training, and it's crucial for building emotional resilience. By shifting mental health into a kind of hygiene-based practice, a method of managing life's inputs, it lowers the perceived social risk of seeking support.
So we've established that the demand for absolute conformity is causing a serious internal psychological crisis for its citizens. But this individual pressure to fit in, it links directly to the nation's political desire to maintain a rigid self-image.
That's the critical connection. The psychological mechanism that compels Kenji to sit back down in the office is the same mechanism that guides national policy regarding difference. We have to start with the long-held myth of Japan as a single ethnic nation.
A myth that really permeates policy and culture, despite the undeniable reality of long coexisting groups. I mean, we have to remember the Ainu people, the indigenous population of Hokkaido, who faced decades of assimilation policies following the Meiji Restoration.
And they were only officially recognized as indigenous in 2008.
Right. And then you have the Zainichi Koreans, the so-called oldcomers, who settled during or before World War II. These groups have historically faced institutional and social exclusion, often struggling with issues of legal status and full integration, which fundamentally contradicts the whole idea of ethnic singularity.
So given the necessity for labor, especially after the economic boom and the subsequent demographic collapse, Japan couldn't maintain this fiction forever. The policy response to the growing number of new foreign residents is what they call tabunka kisei, or multicultural living.
This policy was officially launched by the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications, the MIC, back in 2006. Crucially, the implementation is highly decentralized. The MIC sets the broad framework, but the heavy lifting is delegated to local governments.
And we're talking about a lot of them. 995 municipalities, which is over half the country, have established these promotion plans as of 2024.
The core goal, as it's officially defined, sounds appealing. The coexistence of people of different nationalities, ethnicities, and other backgrounds who recognize each other's cultural differences and build equal relationships while living together as members of the local community. But when you look closely,
that definition immediately reveals its utilitarian core. It's a consequentialist approach. The primary goal is not achieving rights-based inclusion or fostering true diversity. It is about avoiding friction and maintaining a peaceful daily life.
the quietude of the community.
Exactly. It functions more as an abstract slogan, a modern iteration of maintaining law, rather than a rights-based framework rooted in political philosophy.
And this is where it fundamentally separates itself from established models of Western multiculturalism, such as those you'd find in Canada, Australia, or the UK.
Right. In those Western models, the policies are predicated on the institutional recognition of cultural groups. That includes legal protections and public support for the reproduction of collective cultural traditions. Tabunka Kisei recognizes that cultural identity exists, but it explicitly stops short of publicly supporting its maintenance and reproduction.
So practical support for things like mother tongue preservation is severely limited. The entire structure of integration focuses heavily on Japanese language acquisition, which is seen not just as helpful, but as a mandatory prerequisite for a successful daily life.
which means the implicit, if not explicit, goal is adaptation, or frankly, assimilation into the majority culture. Minorities are allowed to participate in cohesion, but only by conforming strictly to majority norms. This assimilation pressure is compounded because the policy itself is designed, funded, and often executed from the perspective of the majority population, who often view difference as a potential source of disruption.
And this policy structure creates a profound contradiction in Japan's approach to its severe labor shortage. Due to 13 consecutive years of population decline, with nearly 30% of the population aged 65 or over, the need for labor in key sectors like construction, nursing care, and agriculture is critical.
The government knows they need people. The foreign worker population reached about 2.3 million by the end of 2024. Yet, despite being a de facto country of immigration, according to the OECD, the government adamantly and explicitly denies having an immigration policy. They maintain this rhetorical wall.
And they maintain that wall through two specific, highly criticized systems: the Technical Intern Training Program, or TITP, and the Specified Skilled Worker, SSW, system.
These systems are structured specifically to manage the flow of labor while minimizing the commitment to long-term integration. The TITP, for instance, has been widely criticized internationally for creating conditions that often lead to worker exploitation, as interns are tied to specific employers for the duration of their fixed term.
Which can be up to 5 years.
Right, and it's ostensibly for the purpose of transferring skills back to their home country.
So it effectively traps them as temporary labor. And while the SSW system, introduced in 2019, is a bit better, it allows workers in 14 specific industries, and the SSW2 status technically offers pathways to permanent residency and family reunification, the underlying philosophy remains cautious.
Very cautious. The administrative burdens and high thresholds for naturalization consistently underscore this systemic resistance to truly viewing migrants as long-term community members.
To really understand the systemic failures of Tabunka Kaisei, we need to move beyond simple policy labels and use a more powerful analytical tool. This is where we should introduce the work of the critical theorist and philosopher Axel Honneth.
Honne's theory of recognition provides the perfect framework for this. He argues that recognition isn't just tolerance, but the positive affirmation of one's existence and worth by others. His theory breaks down recognition into three essential interconnected spheres.
What are they?
First, there is love. This is recognition in the intimate sphere family, very close relationships, which is fundamental for forming self-consciousness and a positive relationship with oneself.
Second is law. This is legal recognition as equal citizens, guaranteeing universal rights and protection under the law, which is what fosters self-respect.
And third, and perhaps most complex in Japan's case, is solidarity. This is social recognition in society, commensurate with one's unique contributions and worth in the social network, which ultimately fosters self-esteem.
And Honneth's point is that a lot of social problems come from a lack of recognition in one of these areas.
A lack of recognition, or what he calls misrecognition. And when we use this framework, Japan's policy approach immediately shows major gaps, particularly in the legal and solidarity spheres.
So let's start with the failure in the legal sphere, the layer that should guarantee self-respect.
The primary failure here stems from institutional vulnerabilities surrounding education rights. The right to education is not fully guaranteed for foreign children in Japan because, technically, the compulsory education system doesn't apply to non-nationals.
So they can go to school, but it's not a guaranteed right.
Exactly. While they are encouraged to enroll, their status often remains precarious, linked entirely to their parents' temporary visa status. This instability directly compromises their identity formation and their fundamental human rights.
And these institutional vulnerabilities, they create glaring academic disparities. We're not just talking about cultural gaps. Right. We're talking about systemic barriers like hierarchical school tracking and insufficient Japanese language support tailored to new arrivals.
The data is stark evidence of a system failing to provide legal equality. The transition rate to upper secondary school for students requiring Japanese language instruction is only 90.3%. That's significantly lower than the national average of 99.0%. And the consequences follow them into the workforce. The non-regular employment rate among working graduates needing language support is a staggering 38.6% compared to the national average of just 3.1%.
38.6%. That's not just a number. That represents individuals who are trapped in a permanent underclass. Non-regular employment means lower pay, little to no path for advancement, exclusion from traditional corporate benefits, and zero job security.
It's a profound failure of the law sphere to translate into substantive social mobility and self-respect.
Now let's pivot to the solidarity layer, social recognition based on contribution, which fosters self-esteem. This is where the gap between Japan's famed politeness and genuine inclusion becomes, well, an insurmountable chasm.
There is a persistent lack of psychological and social interaction with these new foreign communities. They remain invisible others. Prejudices, indifference, and discriminatory attitudes hinder the development of mutual understanding and trust. The resources dedicated to substantive integration are often just woefully inadequate, creating a vicious cycle of marginalization and policy neglect.
And we can see the absolute limits of Tabunka Kisei's conflict avoidance approach, playing out in recent community conflicts where differences become disruptive to established norms.
One clear example is the tensions in Warabi City, Saitama Prefecture, involving Kurdish asylum seekers and local Japanese residents. In this area, a high concentration of Kurdish families has led to visible cultural differences in public spaces, in community interaction, which locals perceive as disruptive. The Tabunka Kisei model is entirely unprepared to handle visible disruptive difference because its core purpose is quiet conformity.
And this challenge extends to fundamental structures of society, like death rituals.
Oh, absolutely. The difficulty of reconciling Islamic burial traditions, which require ground burial, with Japan's overwhelming reliance on cremation is a critical example. Local governments are unprepared, and tragically only 7 cemeteries across the entire nation currently accept Muslim burials. This demonstrates that the policy fails when it confronts differences in core societal values, religion, or the fundamental use of public space.
And what's truly devastating is the interconnectedness of honne's spheres. A failure in the social sphere, in solidarity, actively undermines the stability of the intimate sphere, or love.
That's the vicious cycle. If foreign children feel pressure to assimilate completely, they often lose their native language and cultural heritage because they lack the social affirmation for it. When language proficiency with the mother tongue breaks down, communication with their parents can deteriorate, causing a reversal of social status within the family unit.
And the home, which should be the absolute safe space for intimate approval and self-affirmation, is undermined. This leads to problems with parent-child relationships, it affects the child's self-esteem, and it further compromises their ability to achieve stable social participation.
So we have a society where the internal psychological well-being of its citizens is under siege by conformity, and where the national policy structure is systemically misrecognizing and marginalizing its new residents. Both of these are not isolated cultural issues. They are fundamentally destroying the nation's economic vitality.
Right, the economic context is sobering. Japan has been in a long period of stagnation. The Bank of Japan has engaged in aggressive monetary easing, resulting in the highest central bank assets to GDP ratio among the G7. They've seen a massive currency depreciation. The yen fell over 40% between 2000 and 2021, and yet sustained recovery remains elusive.
The failure is not just macroeconomic. Tight fiscal policy and rigid government spending are major drags. Social security and bond expenditures now account for over half of total government expenditure, reducing fiscal flexibility. But the real failure lies at the micro level, the structural rigidities that are destroying national competitiveness.
We can actually track this collapse in global standing using the IMD World Competitiveness Ranking. Japan, once a world leader in the early 1990s, has plummeted to 34th out of 63 countries as of 2022. GDP per capita has been stalling since 2015, dropping Japan to 20th among OECD countries.
And the data, it isolates the exact failure point. The massive drag is labeled business efficiency, which fell catastrophically from 19th place in 2014 down to 55th in 2020. That is a collapse.
A total collapse. And it's rooted in 3 fundamental structural rigidities, all tied, ironically, to the rigid conformity the society cherishes. The first rigidity is the slow pace of business management, or the profound lack of regeneration.
There is a distinct lack of entrepreneurship and, paradoxically, a low corporate bankruptcy rate by global standards. This means old, non-competitive firms are kept alive, often through public support for small and medium-sized enterprises, or SMEs.
So it prevents the necessary creative destruction that clears the path for new, dynamic companies.
Exactly. The percentage of small firms operating for 10 years or more is overwhelmingly high compared to the UK or the US. And this rigidity extends deep into the labor market. Labor fluidity is extremely low. Over 50% of male workers in Japan and Italy have over 10 years of service with the same company. Loyalty is valued over adaptability.
Compounding this is the seniority-based personnel system. Promotion ages are consistently delayed compared to key international competitors like the US, China, and India. This system, while valuing decades of experience, actively hinders a firm's ability to adapt swiftly to rapid changes in global technology and consumer demands.
Because fresh talent and disruptive ideas are institutionally sidelined until their 50s.
The second rigidity is the lack of enthusiasm for digitalization, which might seem strange for a country known for technological prowess.
But here's the nuance. Japanese firms overwhelmingly view technology as a cost-cutting tool, prioritizing efficiency reduction over value-added creation. They often rely heavily on external IT vendors and lack critical in-house systems expertise. The mindset is efficiency preservation, not disruptive transformation.
The result is that ICT investment is systematically underweight compared to other major developed countries. And that investment is heavily biased toward physical hardware rather than value-creating software and cloud infrastructure.
Which explains why Japan dropped 8 spots in the global digital competitiveness ranking by 2021. And the third factor is the slow, almost reluctant response to globalization, characterized by an intense inward orientation. Japan's large domestic market historically reduced the incentive to seek overseas profits.
The numbers confirm this. Japan's ratio of goods and services exports to GDP is only 17%, the third lowest among the top 15 countries for domestic demand. This inward focus creates a systemic lack of exposure.
And this inward orientation is further reinforced by caution toward foreign capital. Inward direct investment remains exceptionally low, around 7% of GDP. This combination leads to what analysts call an overwhelming dearth of opportunities for both firms and personnel to gain experience with global competition and international best practices.
This confluence of economic rigidity and cultural exclusion is perfectly illustrated by the case of Elena, the software engineer who left Fukuoka. She represents the glass wall of the guest.
Elena was specifically recruited for her innovative, disruptive potential. She was fluent in Japanese and brought a fresh global perspective. She was treated with the famous omotenashi, that high level of polite, selfless hospitality, as a guest. But structurally, she was never allowed to be a family member capable of changing the internal dynamics of the company.
So when she brought innovative ideas, the very disruptive thinking required for economic vitality, they were met not with an aggressive no, but with that polite corporate deferral. That is very difficult.
Which is corporate speak for no.
Yeah.
Her ideas were structurally rejected because she was an outsider disrupting the established law. And here's where we link back to Honne's framework. The firm's failure to grant Elena social recognition or solidarity meant her contribution, her core worth as an innovative engineer, was automatically invalidated. Her talent, her perspective, her disruptive potential were all casualties of the culture of polite conformity.
And Elena eventually left for Singapore, taking her talent, her ideas, and her innovation potential with her. Her departure wasn't a failure of her skill set. It was a systemic failure of corporate culture to integrate and recognize difference. It proves that talent recruitment is useless without genuine inclusion that allows for disruptive dialogue.
Given the scale of the psychological distress and the undeniable economic collapse and competitiveness, it is overwhelmingly clear that macroeconomic tweaks are insufficient. Japan needs a fundamental overhaul of its rigid government structures, its labor market, and its competition policies.
The scale of the change required is massive, but we can look to other East Asian and global models for some structural guidance. Even neighboring South Korea, which is navigating similar demographic shifts, foreign residents are now 4.8% of their population, offers comparative insight, despite their own policy challenges.
And if we look globally, Canada offers a gold standard. Their model successfully combines clear economic needs with robust community support, comprehensive language courses, and defined pathways to citizenship through merit-based systems like express entry. They actively plan for permanent integration.
In terms of social equity and legal protection, Germany and Finland provide key lessons. Germany combines labor market integration efforts with strong legal protection against discrimination. Finland, meanwhile, promotes equality-focused education by consciously eliminating rigid tracking systems that often disadvantage immigrant children.
And Australia provides a successful model for scalability and accessibility, utilizing digital platforms to connect migrants seamlessly to resources, community services, and job placement assistance. This technological approach bridges the support gap that decentralized models like Tabunka Kisei often fail to cover.
So drawing on these global insights, 4 critical micro-reforms seem essential for Japan to restore competitiveness and achieve genuine, non-conforming inclusion. The first pillar: pivot government support to workers, not just firms.
This requires gradually scaling back the significant government support that props up non-competitive, small and medium-sized enterprises. While politically difficult, this stimulates the necessary regeneration, allowing non-competitive firms to exit the market. Critically, Japan currently has the lowest public spending on active labor market programs among major advanced countries. That has to change.
So instead of propping up old firms, government resources must expand active labor policies like intensive vocational training, recurrent education, subsidies tied to skill improvement to improve workers' overall skills, and encourage labor shifts toward growth areas like ICT, where the domestic talent gap is gaping.
The second pillar must be to incentivize value creation, shifting away from simple corporate tax cuts. Government support should be channeled through tax incentives that cover human resource development costs. This has to encourage firms to dramatically increase investment in capacity development.
Because right now, Japan lags far behind other major countries in off-the-job training and general skills development investment. Incentives need to be structured to ensure workers acquire general transferable skills, not just job-specific knowledge. And tax incentives should be linked directly to business process improvement through digitalization rewarding software investment and profit expansion, rather than merely hardware deployment.
The third essential reform is revamping personnel and wage systems. The seniority system, which prioritizes tenure over immediate value, must be replaced with job-based employment and wage structures. Wages have to be commensurate with duties, especially for highly skilled personnel like IT professionals.
This is non-negotiable if Japan wants to attract top global talent. Japan suffers from a significant talent gap, with a much smaller percentage of its workforce classified as professionals and technicians compared to its competitors. Moving to a job-based system would incentivize high-skilled foreign workers to remain and directly address that gap.
And the final pillar, which brings us back to our central theme of overcoming conformity, is the need to embrace foreign personnel as a structural asset, not just temporary labor.
Expanding the acceptance of foreign workers, both skilled and unskilled, provides an immediate and necessary benefit. It expands overseas networks and exposes the inadequacies and inefficiencies of rigid Japanese customs and systems. Innovation often requires exposure to different sensibilities and cultures, forcing companies to question the status quo.
True integration is messy. It's not polite silence, it's disruptive dialogue. And that leads us to a powerful anecdote from a principal named Mr. Tanaka, operating in Aichi Prefecture, which illustrates the shift from sterile harmony to genuine connection.
So Mr. Tanaka's school saw a rapid demographic shift. 30% of his classrooms suddenly comprised children of Brazilian and Vietnamese workers. The initial implicit policy, driven by Tabunka Kisei's underlying conformity pressure, was de facto assimilate or float. This resulted in a polite, segregated harmony where the local Japanese children maintained a quiet emotional distance.
Tanaka understood that the polite distance was actually a barrier. He deliberately introduced a Canadian-inspired inclusivity model. He asked the immigrant children to teach the Japanese children their games. This was chaotic. It created a loud, messy, disruptive environment that was absolutely un-Japanese in its disorder.
But in that disorder, genuine connection replaced the stiff silence. This is the crucial policy insight. Successful transition requires redefining harmony itself. It has to move from everyone doing the same thing to everyone playing together, even if the game is new and the rules are messy.
And that requires explicit policy permission for new forms of interaction that facilitate authentic connection, even if they breach the code of quiet conformity.
So if we synthesize everything we've discussed, the psychological toll, the policy failures, the economic stagnation, what is the core lesson here?
The core takeaway is that Japan's challenge is not a lack of resources or technology or intelligence. It is fundamentally a crisis of recognition. The psychological distress, the academic disparities, the failed integration, and the stalled innovation all stem from the systemic failure to grant that necessary level of positive affirmation.
And this absence of recognition becomes a silent killer that quietly erodes social order. The lack of social recognition or solidarity for difference destroys the social bonds necessary for innovation and mutual trust.
And this reverberates deeply into the intimate and legal spheres, affecting the self-esteem and identity of every single resident. True long-term stability demands far more than surface politeness or conflict avoidance. It requires building that indispensable network of mutual affirmation and empathy across society as a whole, a network that allows people to be seen for their unique worth.
So moving forward requires society to engage in deep deliberation, not just on temporary measures, but on fundamental questions of ideology, institution, and education. It requires creating a structural framework for a truly multicultural society that allows every person, Japanese or not, to exist as their full, authentic self without the constant crushing self-erasure that conformity demands.
The economic future and the psychological well-being of the entire population are inextricably linked to the answer to one core question. Can Japan afford to protect its cultural harmony if that harmony requires the constant self-erasure of its citizens and the polite exclusion of the very talent it needs to survive?